Welcome to this wonderful presentation by Rachael Pietsch, who is a multi-award-winning vocal coach and voice function specialist. Hello, Rachael.
Hello, how are you today, Sigrid?
Very good, thank you. It is really great to have you here because we all think, and I'm sure we know that our voice is one of our most powerful tools for influence. And so you're giving us some insights on voice training. What is the real impact? Rachael, take it away, please.
Okay, well, it is a delight to be here, and it's a delight to see some people in the room. And hello to everyone who is joining us later. Yes, I'm a voice coach, and I have been voice coaching for over 30 years, and I specialize in something that's called voice function, and that means that I work closely with the mechanics of your voice to bring about better coordination, ease, but ultimately a better sound that can portray you and your message much more clearly. And I really love doing that because I see it make a huge difference to people's voices. So I'm going to actually take you through what I believe about the need for voice training and some of the research behind it, and we'll just take a deep dive into that, and yeah, I'll take you through that. Let's actually go to a screen share here. I'm just going to quickly find that on my screen. Here we go. Okay, so I run two businesses. One of my businesses is called Rachael Pietsch Vocal Studio, where I teach singers, anyone from professional singers to hobbyists, people who are doing VCE, audition preparation, people who are starting to gig for the first time. So that's one business. And the other business that I run is called Now You're Talking, where I deliver more executive voice coaching to people who are professional voice users. So people like professional speakers, entrepreneurs, C-suite level, or people who are getting ready for interviews, media. So anyone who needs to use their voice for a living. So voice training, what is the real impact? Well, this is the burning question, isn't it? And what I want to do is I actually want to answer this straight away. And I want to do this by looking at a statement that I read on one of my posts recently that one of my connections made, just on one of my posts. And let's actually read it through. I abandoned a webinar by a high profile presenter recently because the two women he had presenting with him were very high pitched and had the irritating habit of raising their voices in an inflection at the end of each sentence, as if it was a question. No, no, and no. And then she goes on to say, the same presenter next time coughed all the way through her presentation, and I abandoned that one too. Now, it's really important to say here that I'm not trying to call out anyone who has, an irritating voice or someone who raises, the inflection at the ends of their sentences or uses vocal fry at the end of their sentences or just turns people off with the sound of their voice. I'm not wanting to call them out. But what I do want to point attention to is there is a cost if we don't look at how we sound. And it's such a crying shame because I have worked with so many intelligent people who are so experienced, very, very qualified, and yet when they're up in front of a group of people in whatever format, however many people, their voice actually lets them down. They can put so much effort into their keynote, into the way that they dress and look, and and don't get me wrong, they are incredibly important areas. But at the same time, as soon as we start to open our mouth, that's basically, it's not where the assessment ends. And unfortunately, this statement here is an indication of a real problem. And so what I'm saying is I know actually how to fix this. So let's actually move on. So what is actually voice function training? So I want to actually go through a bunch of, basic descriptions of what voice function training is. So voice function training is very bespoke and it gets to the heart of what's happening in your voice, which is beyond generic advice. So generic advice such as just speak from your diaphragm, or just speak louder. Imagine that you can just project to the person in the back row. And, that might work for some people, but I think we've got to stop and say that's the point. It only works for some people. And it might seem to work for a lot of people initially, but it is very difficult to do that long term, as in it's very unsustainable. So it's actually quite rare that someone can just start projecting to the back row and their voice is suddenly okay. It's not like I don't know if you remember that movie, Sister Act, the first one, where Whoopi Goldberg is first working with the choir, and there's the girl in the front, the woman who's training to be a nun, and she's sort of standing there singing quietly, and Whoopi Goldberg comes up to her and says, "Come on, girl, sing," and she sort of pushes in her abdomen area, and all of a sudden she's got big notes going on, and then from there on she's able to sing. It is not true that can actually happen. There are no tricks that we can learn to suddenly make our voice strong, because we've got to remember our voices are made up of muscle and ligaments, and there are moving parts that need to be coordinated ideally in order to produce at first balance, and then strength, and then longevity. And that process takes time. So I do like to yammer on about that, because generic advice is just that. It can help maybe one or two people ultimately, but not so. So with voice function training, what we do is we get to the heart of what's happening in your voice. So you might be someone who is like that nun in Sister Act, where you speak quietly. People ask you to speak up all the time, or you find it very hard to project. You might sound whispery and soft, or you might sound really crackly, and you can't really get past that sound. And it's very difficult to feel that there is another way forward for you in terms of the voice that you can actually present with. But there is actually a way. And with voice function training, I can design tools for you where you start to address the areas that are causing the lightness in your voice. And in this case, it often has to do with our vocal cords, which there's two of them. They're in a V shape, and they're connected from the front to the back of your windpipe. And they sit just behind your Adam's apple in your larynx. And what they do when you breathe, when you allow air to pass in and out of your respiratory system, is the vocal cords just sit apart, making way. They're not like this, they're actually like this. They're at the top of the windpipe, and they're only about a centimetre long. But when we create sound, there's these cartilages on the ends of the vocal cords called the arytenoid cartilages. And what they're designed to do is to respond to your brain's message. For example, if you decide to speak loud and clear, well, your arytenoid cartilages, they're going to draw your vocal cords together, and they're actually going to stop a lot of airflow. And that's what creates a strong sound. Whereas for a light voice, someone who is talking very quietly, those vocal cords have parted a little bit. And so the message those arytenoid cartilages are picking up from the brain is we only need to come this far. And so what happens is the voice is allowing too much airflow to come through, and therefore weakening the voice. So we need to give you exercises to start to bring more coordination in bringing your cords together, and then you can get on with the strengthening process, which is what is needed for louder speaking and projection. On the flip side, if you're someone who experiences a lot of tension in your voice, and you have a lot of aching around your throat and your larynx, and you find your muscles tense up a lot when you speak, and you're loud and people can hear you, I'm not saying loud is not a bad thing, but if you're doing it with a lot of help from what we call your extrinsic muscles, then that's also a one-way street. Your vocal cords aren't actually doing the work for you, your outside muscles are. And it's really important that we decompress all of that and put your vocal cords in the position of being able to be isolated and figure out on their own how to strengthen on their own. But I would be giving you a very different set of exercises, and it won't be along the lines of just use your diaphragm or, whatever. It's going to be very, very specific. So that's the first point. Voice function training gets to the heart of what's happening in your voice beyond generic advice. And therefore, it unlocks your true voice. Your true voice is something that is unique to you. Why? Because the makeup, the physical makeup of you and the length of your vocal cords determine how you sound. And if we were to compare two instruments, say like a soprano saxophone and a tenor saxophone, both of those are going to sound slightly different to each other, from each other. And but the reason being is one is bigger than the other. That's it. But if we have a completely different instrument like a clarinet, that's going to sound completely different because the makeup of that instrument is very different. It doesn't have a bend in it. It has a straight line, a straight tube. So we all have slightly different versions of that resonant area of the voice, which is our vocal tract. And our vocal tract is the distance between our vocal cords and our lips. So all of the top of your throat and into your mouth is your vocal tract, which is the same as that resonating tube of an instrument. Now, the other thing that voice function training does is, as a result of you getting the right kind of training that is bespoke for you, that unlocks your true voice, is that it starts to build more ease into your voice because you're not trying to sound like someone else and you're not trying to just find that quick fix. You're allowing the process and you're allowing your voice to understand what balance feels like and what ease feels like. And you work at it and you slowly get better at it and you do feel that strengthening starting to happen. So it does build real ease, real projection, and a greater dynamic range and will last the distance. It also increases your confidence in speaking as a result of that, because you know you can rely on it and it's your voice. And it also prevents pathological issues. So pathological issues such as dysphonia, which is, involves a lot of tension, and things like nodules. You want to avoid developing pathological issues because not because it's a terrible thing to have something go wrong, but it's just really, really inconvenient. If you're used to using your voice so much for your job, I mean, we use our voice every day, all the time, but part of the process of recovering from something that has been diagnosed by an ENT or speech pathologist involves you having complete vocal rest. And so that is time off work, and that is also, you know, loss of income, potential loss of income as well. So you want to try and avoid that. So getting vocal training that is designed for you and just you will help to stave that off. Okay, so let's keep moving here. But ultimately, I love voice function training because your message and your wisdom matters. So whatever you do, you may be the most qualified, you may be the most knowledgeable, but if you can't communicate that message, then that's a crying shame. So learning to speak in a way that grabs people's attention means that you will land your message. And it's really important that you see that we all see the connection between what our voice says and what it's saying about not just us, but what we have to say as well. But I actually think this is the most important reason. Okay, so let's go on to some stats here. Albert Mehrabian's communication tool. This is a very broad table here and very specific to, I think, a certain context, but I think it's still interesting that yes, but we can see that body language, does actually come across much more effectively. Like, that's what people are noticing the most. So, for example, if you're standing talking to someone and you're not looking at them and you're looking at your feet, of course that's going to be a big turn off. But if you're engaging and you're using your hands and you're having a conversation or doing what you need to do and you're doing it well, then that's that people are going to be noticing that quite well. But it's not the spoken words that they'll be focusing on. They'll be focusing on your tone of voice. Isn't that interesting? And in my research, I also found this by Quantified Communications in 2012. The sound of a speaker's voice matters twice as much as the content of the message. So I think we can get the idea here. And it makes me think about, back in the olden days, I think about 100 years ago, when we had the old silent movies. And there was a lot of effort put into how these lovely people presented themselves on the screen. They're beautiful people and they were stars in their own right, simply because of the way they looked and the way they acted. But as soon as the talkies came in, as soon as sound came in, there were a lot of actors who actually lost their job, and you can imagine why, because their voice didn't sound up to par, and again, which is a real crying shame. And at the end of the day, you could look the most beautiful, present the most beautifully, but as soon as you open your mouth, if that's turning people off, you've lost them. Doesn't matter what you've got to give. All right, some more statistics here. According to Speech Pathology Australia, around 1.24 million Australian adults will develop voice issues. Up to 60% of occupational voice users will experience a voice problem at least once during their career, and women are more likely to develop voice issues than men. Just let that pickle for a moment. When I read that, I think the number, the 1.24 million Australian adults, when I read that, it wasn't written as that. It was written as a percentage. And I thought, I wonder what that translates to in numbers. And when I saw it was 1.24, I thought, gee, that's a good chunk of Australia. I can't remember exactly how many Australians we have in our country at the moment, but it's really that's quite a big number. And to go on to realize that up to 60% of occupational voice users, as in people who rely on their voice for their job, will experience a voice problem at least once during their year. So just cast your mind to when, over your career, were there moments where you were worried about your voice? And we're not talking about having a couple of days of speaking a lot and you feel like your voice is tired, but you slept on it and it was okay the next day. That's not a real voice issue. That's just a bit of overuse. It's like if I sprinted around the block and got a stitch, I need to, get a break. We're talking about something that really worries you. So you may have had a cold and you have, been coughing a lot. And as you've recovered from that cold, your voice doesn't feel like it's returning back to normal. And it's been going on for weeks. And you think, that's really alarming. That's counted as a voice issue. Have you experienced a change in your voice that you're not sure about? The lack of the lack of range. You can't say hi as easily as you used to. That's a voice issue. And they speak to certain ways that your voice is functioning that need to be addressed. And we're not talking about, oh no, they need to be addressed, or you may not ever have a voice again. It's not about that. It's about how effective do you want to do your job? And is it affecting your ability to continue to do your job in the way you would like to? I remember I was working with a children's book author last year, and he was about to go on, and he was an Australian book author, and he was about to go on a tour in America to lots of different schools and libraries in America. And one of the reasons he came to me is because he gets in front of, a room full of children, and he is incredibly dynamic. He is, he would be the funnest person to meet if you were a kid, honestly. And so he's very dynamic. His voice is doing character voices. He's jumping around the room. Everything's fun. But because he's been doing it a lot, particularly around, in his tours in Australia, his voice is starting to show how much that's wearing on his voice. So we taught him strategies for how to not have that happen. I did have to train his voice to function differently, and he went on to have a successful tour. But imagine how much it would have limited him if he wasn't able to continue to be that dynamic. He needs to be really dynamic with his audiences. So cast your mind to the areas where you really need to get to rely on your voice to function or sound a certain way, and just ask yourself the question, what would happen if my voice started to experience difficulty? Could I continue, or would I need some help? Or will I need some help to prevent that from happening? And but And unfortunately, women are more likely to develop more voice issues than men. I do actually want to stop and speak about this because as women, we often, and I'm not trying to talk about every woman, and I'm not talking about men and women as them and us. It's just an observation, and there's been a lot of research around this. But women who work in more male dominated environments. I don't like saying the word dominated, but more areas where there's more men on staff as opposed to women, particularly in corporate areas. We tend to start to bring our voices down here to speak because there is a belief that if we start to sound more authoritative and lower, we're going to command more respect. And you know what? I actually agree with you. So where does that leave voice function? So basically, research has shown that when you do have a more deep, more warm sounding voice, people are going to be responding to you more favorably. But there is a way to do that for us girls that is different to what we think. So most people tend to go down here and start speaking here, but I don't know if you can tell, I've lost a little bit of personality in my voice. I'm trying to get a little bit of out of that monotone, but I'm still trying to get that depth. And I think a lot of women fall into this trap. And it's actually not really good for your voice to speak down here for long periods of time. It's very, very close to the bottom of my voice. My voice doesn't like my pitch being here. It doesn't function as easily. There is a tightness around my larynx, and it is very difficult to project a long way without feeling like I'm having to really push on my voice. So imagine having to do that all day. Your voice is going to feel very, very, very tired. So my advice is to find what is called your optimal speaking pitch range, which is, incidentally, the part of your voice where your voice shines. It's the sweet spot in your voice where your voice operates more easily. You don't feel that you have to really push to get your sound out. You don't feel hemmed in. You feel like you've got access to more dynamic range, and you can project more easily, and you can develop strength more easily. So we're not talking about the lowest you can go, and we're not talking about the highest you can go. We're talking about somewhere in the middle where you feel that you can really express yourself. Now, that's sort of counter to what we was just saying about, yes, those lower warm tones tend to be more what people respond to. But there's a way to do this that will actually give you those warm tones. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the sound of my voice, but I'm already using those. If I took away what voice function training has given me, I will actually sound like this. And I don't know if you relate to this, but I've completely let go, and I all of a sudden sound quite girly, quite feminine, and I don't feel strong at all. But here's an interesting fact. I did not change pitch. All I did was let go of my training. So if I just put that training back in again, I get that warmth and I get that depth again. And again, I have not changed my pitch. It is definitely the same as where it was a moment ago. So here it is again. I'm just going to go back to here and show you where a lot of women are afraid to speak out because they're afraid to sound like this. But if we actually engage our voice properly and position it properly, we can get more depth in there, what we call bottom resonance, and we can project a lot more easily, and we'll have a lot more warmth. And I'm speaking in a way that is, without getting too technical, I'm using my vowels in a way that encourages more resonance. So there is more to the harmonic stack. If I talk like this, it actually becomes quite shallow. There's not a lot of fullness there. And I find it very hard to really get solid sound there. But if I speak like this, there is a lot more fullness to my sound. We call that full resonance. And that's how we get it. We don't get it by speaking from our diaphragm. And incidentally, we don't speak from our diaphragm. We actually speak from our vocal cords. But there's no amount of breathing work that you could possibly do to help you sound like that. It has to actually be how do you repronounce your words to get you that. And that's what that training is designed to do. Okay. So And this is just a quick definition. Professional voice users, which is basically who I've been talking about and to, I hope, are individuals who use their voice as their primary tool of trade, as in you can't carry out employment activities without using your voice. So you don't have to be a professional speaker to be considered to be a professional voice user. Okay, in a study, people who hear or people who heard recordings of rough, weak, strained, or breathy voices tended to label the speaker as negative, weak, passive, or tense. This is how people are perceiving us if we don't sound right. But people with normal voices are seen as successful, sexy, sociable, and smart. Vocal irritants such as uptalk, as in pronouncing statements as if they were questions, and vocal fry, ending words in a raspy growl. You might, or actually, I'll finish this sentence. It'll make the listener think the person who is speaking is either uncomfortable or in pain or bored or just don't want to be there. You might think that speaking low is going to help your voice if you're tired, if your voice is tired. A lot of people do this when they feel their voice is tired and this sound comes in. This is what vocal fry is. And yeah, compare how this sounds to how I was sounding a moment ago. I think a moment ago I was sounding much more interesting. And for the love of God, Rachael, please just stop talking like that because it's really annoying me now. So, yeah, if you think that speaking lower is actually helping your voice, remember what we were just talking about, your optimal speaking pitch range. If you are too low in your voice can't function properly and it will fall into that, it can easily fall into that vocal fry and you can't project as easily, blah, 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 blah. You are working your voice harder by speaking too low. So I just wanted to point that out as well. Now, annoyed listeners often assume nothing can be done to change an irritating voice and that speaker is often unaware of the problem. So, when you're listening to a speaker, you're noticing things about their voice, but because they're so focused on what they're saying, they're not focusing on the sound of their voice. So you just presume that's their voice. That's how they present. I don't really want to hear from that person again, or I'm not going to go and hear them speak, or I don't like going to their meetings. It can have such a subconscious effect that we don't realize, but in most cases, people's voices can be strengthened or improved through therapy, coaching, or feedback, excluding some pathological issues that need to be looked at. But that is pretty much the end of what I have got to present there. I think I've got for half an hour. 28 minutes. I've got way more to say if you'll let me, but let's actually open it up for some discussion. I'm sure there's some questions that people have come up with.
Let me get started, Rachael. That was absolutely fascinating to hear more about it. The points that I really took away was that my personal voice is unique to me. It's sort of like genetic makeup or something. I'd never thought of it in that way. It makes perfect sense, but I just had never thought of it that way. And I like how you said that it is the voice that carries the message. That's how I verbalize it, right? So it's not the message itself, but it's the voice that carries it. I think that's fascinating because for all of us in business who do speak in order to get our message out there, that is so important. A question that I have is it how we feel that brings our voice out there in different ways? Or is that just my imagination that I sometimes think I'm more because I'm excited about something and I really know what I'm talking about and my voice is really strong and I feel good. And sometimes I'm a bit more hesitant. Is that really true, Rachael, or is that just my imagination?
No, it's absolutely true. You're right on the mark there, Sigrid. It is something that is unique to humans, and as human beings, we are expressive, and we want to be able to do that completely freely. And, when we are excited, we're going to be using our voice at a greater volume. So we're going to be requiring more strength from our vocal cords. Whereas when we are a little bit hesitant and we want to speak quietly, we want to be able to rely on our voice to still stay together, even though we're speaking softly. But see how you can still hear me and I'm quite clear. I haven't gone to this breathy sound. Breathy sounds and whispering, it's really hard on the voice because those extrinsic muscles start to kick in. So it's really important that, yes, we allow free expression, but part of that strengthening phase is to help you to give you access to all of that expression.
Mm.
But yeah, and it's a brain thing because we don't think about I'm about to be happy right now, so my voice is going to express that. We just do it. And voice function training is all about getting the groundwork done so that you can operate in the moment.
And that's what I heard you say. I mean, that was a question I had, but I think you've actually answered that quite well for me when I heard you give us the variations and the different ways of that voice can really be trained. You did give us some examples. It's not training in terms of using the diaphragm, like you said earlier, or breathing different or something. It really is much more tangible, if I can use that word. I'm not sure whether that's the right word, but it has to do with vowels. I heard you mention that, for example. Can you just say a little bit more about that, if you don't mind?
Yes, yes. So I can dispel a little bit of myth around, the use of the diaphragm, if you like, because there have been, various pedagogies from, 100 years ago that one teacher would have found that, oh gee, when I help my student with breathing, that really helped, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about breathing and diaphragm. And unfortunately these sorts of things sort of catch on, and it becomes a little bit too popular, and all of a sudden it is the fix all for everything.
Mm.
And the amount of times I hear someone say, just speak from your diaphragm, or just take a big deep breath, you'll be fine. I just cringe, and I just walk away. And don't engage. So yeah, we don't speak from our diaphragm. Our diaphragm lives under our rib cage, and it's quite a big muscle that sits in a dome shape, and it's almost like it's like halves our body. And so when we breathe in, our diaphragm descends, and it creates a vacuum-like effect into the bottom of our lungs. And when the diaphragm descends, it pushes out our abdominal wall, and it's like it comes down into where all of those organs are, and everything has to get out of the way, which is why we see the expansion in the front.
Mm.
So the diaphragm descends, and when we get that low breath, so that is already happening without our help. It just happens. We don't have to make it happen any better. But the way that we can help train the voice, and for the voice to operate at maximum balance, is if we work on what's called a low breath, if we develop a low breath. So we focus on getting our air into the bottom of our lungs and not up in our chest, because air up in our chest means that our our vocal cords are put under undue pressure because they're having to keep all that air at bay, because they're also a valving mechanism. They don't just create sound, but they're there to hold air back. So if all this air is being taken in, then it's having a hard time. It's like trying to close a door on a windy day. It's actually quite difficult. So we
Mm.
don't need to put that under pressure. Also, air sitting up here causes our larynx to sit up, and it jams the mechanism, because when we go from low pitches to high pitches, our vocal cords have to stretch, and they have to stretch forward, and the larynx has to tilt forward slightly to allow for that stretch. So if the larynx is jammed, you're not going to get to those high notes easily. So if you go hi, it's because your larynx is jamming. It's like I can't get to the
Fascinating.
yes. So all of this has to happen, effectively. So that's just, the breath side of things.
Yeah.
So the breath has to be important. It has to do what it needs to do. The vocal cords need to be free to do what they need to do, and, come together nice and cleanly and isolated. And then when we say words, in Australia, we like to say, yeah, nah. And I think we were just having a conversation earlier about how, it's such an Australian saying, yeah, nah. But that vowel, it's very larynx hiking inducing. But if we get used to saying ah as opposed to ah. I don't know if you can hear the difference between those.
Yes.
And the difference you're hearing is literally a difference in the shape of my vocal tract. When I say ah, I can feel my tongue going up. I can feel space closing off in here. It's like, imagine this resonant tube that is my vocal tract, like around about this area is a little bit of a squeeze. And what we're doing when we actually change the shape of the vowel, we're relieving that squeeze. We're reshaping our vocal tract. So if I was to take, you know how I was using the example of the saxophone. Saxophones sound really full and big, but if I ran over it, God forbid, it'd get really squashed. It would sound incredibly different, very, very different if we blew into that. And if there's no space in there, then it's going to sound really high pitched and squeaky and even harder to get breath through. So saying, yeah, nah. I mean, no one says that in Australia. But when we say, we get a better shape. But this is beginner stuff. As you start to get more and more advanced, you can still say, yeah, nah, but still shape your vocal tract
Mm.
differently because you're very, very familiar with what a good shape should be. I hope that doesn't confuse anyone.
No, I think it sounds like learning a whole new language in a way to some extent there. So I just want to open the floor, the floor whether we have any questions. If anybody would like to ask a question openly right now, while we do have Rachel here on this fascinating topic of how to use the voice in a, a really different way, in the way that it functions. Please speak up and ask your question, because who knows, somebody else might have a similar question and is not
Sure.
and is going to hear it on the recording later on. Anyone got anything? Um, just having a quick look there.
I have
Ashley?
a question, Sigrid and Rachel. Thank you for that presentation. I was really curious about like thinking about, babies when we're born and their voices and how much it changes. And then the points you made about, vocal fry or heightened pitches, and how that affects other humans and how they don't like it as much. Have you found like what creates that in people? Is that a trauma kind of response, or maybe it's because they grew up with parents who speak with vocal fry or something? I was just
Oh God,
curious because
yeah,
you're not born with vocal fry, right? So how does
exactly.
that? Yeah.
Exactly. You raise such an interesting point, Ashley, because I think, we can talk about the practical and the technical, but we've got to remember we're in human bodies with emotions and histories and families of origin, environments that we grow up in, and they do impact how we speak. A lot of people that I work with, particularly, I'm just thinking of my singing students at the moment. A lot of people were told, when they were younger, don't sing, you sound terrible. And so it shut them down. So them getting their voice out has been a real struggle. And I've worked with people who actually have nothing wrong with their voice. They have nothing wrong with their ability to hear in tune or sing in tune, but because they've had to really overcome that self-belief, that self-belief that put them down, and it creates a lot of anxiety. They've had to really overcome that, and it was all because of the message they got when they were growing up. And vocal fry, it could be something that if your parents speak that way, yes, you are definitely going to speak that way. I remember I taught not so long ago a brother and sister from a family, and they had shocking speaking voices. It was just this, when I say shocking, I mean from a technical point of view, I could almost hear the damage that was being done every time they spoke. It was very raspy and very quiet, and the whole family spoke like this. The whole family. When I met the parents, I'm like, of course, that's where it comes from. So they had that hurdle to overcome, and they did. They had to work hard, but they overcame that. But we can also fall into habits as well. not just based on who we're subconsciously emulating, but also on the tail end of a sickness. Some irritant can happen. So like something like clearing the throat is a habit that people fall into after a sickness. And my advice is to drop that habit as soon as you possibly can, because clearing a throat slams your vocal cords together over and over and over. And it's like if you do a lot of that and then do a lot of squeezy, compressed talking, you're a candidate for possibly developing nodules, which is like a blister on your vocal cords. And the best way to make a blister go away is to stop doing what causes the blister. Don't let it go on for too long where you have to opt for surgery to have it removed.
Absolutely fascinating. Rachel, there is so much to talk about. I already get that from what you've shared here. I absolutely thank you for those insights, and I'm looking forward to hearing them all again on the recording of this one now. So that was Rachael Pietsch, multi-award winning vocal coach and voice function specialist with voice training. What is the real impact? Thank you, Rachael.
Thank you.